My name is Evelyn Hawthorne, and last Christmas I stood on a frozen back porch while my own family celebrated without me. They laughed, clinked glasses, opened gifts, and passed the cranberry sauce, all while I stood outside in the cold, locked out like a forgotten ghost. Not by mistake, not by accident, intentionally. You might actually regret skipping this part. So before you sit down and listen, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to GracesTruth channel. Now let's listen to this story. I arrived at my son's house just after 4 p.m. The wind had picked up, dusting the walkway with snow. My old boots crunched along the path, and I had to hold the railing a little tighter than usual. It was my third Christmas there since moving out of the old house, the one Henry and I built together. After he passed, they insisted I come celebrate with them. I didn't fight it. I never do. I learned long ago that pushing people only makes them pull away faster. The lights were up, a bit garish for my taste, blinking reds and blues, but festive. Their wreath was store-bought, symmetrical, with no scent. The old pine cone one I made years ago was gone. Inside warmth hit me like a wave. The scent of honey ham, cinnamon, and fresh pine needles. I'd brought gingerbread, my usual, carefully wrapped, tied with ribbon. It had cracked in two during the drive, but I'd pieced it back together. Whitney opened the door. She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. Her mouth moved the way people do when they're pretending to be happy you're here, but secretly wished you weren't. "Oh, Evelyn, you're early." I looked at my watch. "It's 4. Deppen." Her smile froze. "Of course. Come in." Mark was nowhere in sight. She took the gingerbread and set it on the counter without looking at it. "You remember the way," she said, already walking off. I stepped inside. The living room was warm but sterile. All beige and metal, no photos on the mantel, no ornaments made by children, just color-coded bulbs and decorative ribbon. A magazine version of Christmas. I found my coat hook already full. I held my coat in my arms, unsure where to put it. Voices drifted in from the kitchen. I heard laughter, a champagne pop. I walked toward them. "Evelyn." Mark finally appeared, face flushed, eyes wide. He hugged me quickly, almost guiltily. "Glad you made it." "I brought gingerbread." "Of course you did," he said, glancing toward Whitney, who didn't react. I noticed something then. The tree. It didn't sparkle. Not really. It blinked mechanically. No tinsel, no heirloom angel. Not the one I passed down. Just a symmetrical star bought in bulk. "Looks lovely," I said anyway. No one asked how I was. No one took my coat. No one asked about my drive or my knees or if I'd eaten. So I drifted to the edge of the room like furniture, present but unnoticed. Whitney's voice cut through the kitchen. "Why does she always come so early?" I turned my head sharply. She hadn't seen me. She stood by the island, whispering to her sister, who giggled behind a wine glass. "She always shows up like she still lives here." I stepped back before they could say more. That's when I reached for the teapot on the counter, poured myself a cup, and walked out to the back porch. No one saw me leave. I didn't take my coat. Outside, the cold hit my lungs like smoke. I stood in my old slippers, holding that steaming mug, trying not to let the sting of Whitney's words freeze my heart. I'd heard worse. I'd been called worse. But not by someone who used to hug me every Mother's Day and call me Mom. I stared at the snow-covered garden. The swing set was still there. Barely used. It looked so much like the one Henry built. A piece of the past trying to survive in the sterile present. The porch light flicked off. I reached for the sliding door. It didn't budge. I jiggled the handle. Locked. I knocked once. No one came. Inside, through the window, I saw them. Whitney, her sister Mark. They were setting the table, laughing. I knocked again. Harder. Louder music. The clinking of dishes. Laughter. And then Whitney turned. She looked directly at me. Our eyes met. She reached for a wine glass and walked away. I didn't panic. At first I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had bumped the lock without realizing. Maybe I'd just have to wait for a lull in the music for someone to notice. That's how the mind protects you. It gives you an out. It makes excuses for cruelty until the excuses run out. The mug in my hands had gone cold. The snow beneath my feet started to soak into my slippers. Still I waited. I tapped once more. Not a bang. Not desperation. Just enough to remind them I was there. Nothing. Inside, Whitney danced with her sister, spinning to some jazzy Christmas song, careless and beautiful, in that modern way that pretends kindness is a burden. Mark brought plates to the table. He smiled. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw them clink glasses. Like I didn't exist. I watched them pass around dishes, potatoes, ham, green beans, almondine recipes I used to make. Whitney had copied my menu exactly down to the cranberry chutney, the same one I'd made for their first Christmas together when she was still trying to impress me. I stood there invisible behind a pane of glass. Eventually, I gave up knocking. The cold had crept into my skin like regret. I wrapped my arms around myself and looked out at the yard instead. It wasn't even their yard, not really. I'd paid the down payment on this house when Henry died. Gave them the money to move in. Gave up the old family place so they could raise their kids in something newer, bigger, shinier. And now here I was, shut out of a home I helped build. I stepped off the porch, careful not to slip, and walked around the side of the house. The front lights were off now, all curtains drawn. I tried the front door just in case. Still locked, still silent. I stood on the porch and waited. A car drove by, headlights sweeping across me, slowing slightly. I turned my face away, embarrassed, as if I were the one in the wrong. Eventually, I made it to the driveway. My car sat cold, half covered in snow. I didn't have my keys with me. They were still in my purse inside, along with my phone, but the car was unlocked. Out of old habit, I kept it that way. Small towns do that to you. I climbed into the back seat. The upholstery was stiff. The air stung. I used the old blanket I kept in the trunk, meant for emergencies, and wrapped it around my knees. I used my scarf as a pillow. My coat, thankfully still on my arm, became a shield against the cold. I lay there, heart racing but slow at the same time. The kind of rhythm grief plays in your chest when betrayal sets in. When you start to realize this wasn't an accident, this wasn't a mistake. They locked me out. On purpose. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I woke up just before dawn. Frost had climbed across the windows like vines. The world was quiet. Inside the house, the lights were dimmed. Someone had fallen asleep on the couch. I could see the top of Mark's head behind the curtain. He was snoring. I sat there watching my breath fog the air. Then I laughed. Not a real laugh. A strange, breathy sound. The kind that slips out when you're on the edge of crying, but your body chooses disbelief instead. When the sun finally rose, I got out of the car. My bones ached. My knees screamed. I walked up the path to the front door and knocked once. Whitney answered. She was still in her robe, mascara smudged under her eyes. "Oh," she said, blinking. "You're still here." I didn't speak. She stepped aside. "Come in." No apology. No explanation. Not even a lie. I walked past her into the kitchen. The gingerbread was still untouched. I poured myself a cup of coffee, burnt and cold, and sat at the table. Mark walked in a few minutes later, rubbing his neck. He paused when he saw me. "You're up early." I looked at him. No recognition. No guilt. Just a son who didn't realize or didn't care where his mother had spent the night. Whitney sat across from me, stirring her coffee like nothing happened. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. I didn't answer, because some silences aren't meant to be filled. Some are meant to echo. When I left later that morning, no one stopped me. There were no hugs, no farewells. Not even the fake kind where people kiss the air beside your cheek and tell you, "Let's do this again soon." I simply stood, slipped my coat over aching shoulders, and walked out the front door like a polite stranger. Not a mother, not a grandmother, just an afterthought. The driveway crunched beneath my boots. My car started reluctantly. The defroster wheezed as I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the house through the windshield. Inside, they moved around slowly. Like any normal family on the morning after Christmas, sipping coffee, eating leftovers, complaining about gift receipts. And none of them noticed the missing piece sitting out front in the cold. I drove away. The house I returned to was quiet, and for once it didn't comfort me. Every creak of the floorboards, every breath of the old radiator felt too loud in comparison to the silence that had grown inside me. I placed my gingerbread down on the counter, still untouched. The ribbon sagged. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at it. That cracked little roof patched with icing made me think of Henry, of the Christmas we spent snowed in when he made hot cider from scratch and told stories about the ghosts in his childhood home. I cried for him that morning. But not because he was gone, because I knew if he were alive, none of this would have happened. He would have never let them lock me out. Not physically, not emotionally. He was a wall between me and storms. And now I was just standing in the rain. That afternoon, I swept the kitchen floor and found a red sequin beneath the chair. It must have fallen from someone's dress clung to my scarf and traveled home with me like a reminder of what I wasn't welcome to be part of. I held it in my palm and let it catch the light, then dropped it in the trash. Around 4, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery driver holding a small package. "For Evelyn Hawthorne," he asked. I nodded. He handed me a gold envelope with my name embossed in script. No return address. I stepped inside, tore it open. It was a card. Inside, a watercolor of a snow-covered house, warm light glowing from inside, and a message. I saw what they did. I'm sorry they didn't. It was unsigned. But the handwriting, it was clearly my granddaughter Grace. I held the card to my chest, and something softened. Because someone saw. I sat at my writing desk, the one with the small chipped drawer, and opened my journal. I hadn't written in it since Henry's funeral. That felt like a lifetime ago. I pulled out my pen, took a deep breath, and wrote 4 words. They locked me out. And then the words came pouring like thawed snowmelt. What I felt, what I heard, what I saw through the glass, what I would never forget. By the time I looked up, the sun had dipped low behind the bare trees. And I wasn't cold anymore. I had a story now, and stories are power. That evening, I made soup. Chicken and rice. Nothing fancy, just something warm to keep my hands busy. I chopped slowly, letting the rhythm of the knife against the cutting board quiet the buzz in my head. The wind howled against the windows, and I thought how strange that I should feel more at home alone in this silence than among my own family. I ladled the soup into 2 bowls. One I ate. The other I set across from me out of habit. I hadn't done that in a while, not since the first lonely Christmas, when I still half believed Henry would somehow show up. That kind of grief turns into ritual even if it's quiet, even if you tell no one. I took the empty bowl back to the sink and rinsed it slowly. Outside, the snow started again. The next morning, I received a call from Elaine, my niece from Henry's side. We didn't speak often, but she had a way of showing up at the edges of moments like this. "I heard you were at Mark's for Christmas," she said. "Yes." Pause. "How was it?" I didn't lie. I was locked outside while they ate dinner. Silence. "You mean locked out metaphorically?" "No," I said. "Physically. On the back porch." She sucked in a breath. "They locked the door." I told her everything. And when I finished, she didn't offer pity. She offered clarity. "Aunt Evelyn?" She said, "You do know your name is still on that property's mortgage, right?" I blinked. "No, it's not. I gave it to them." "You paid the down payment," she said. "But I don't think the paperwork ever changed." I remember because Henry made a point of keeping it that way. I stood up, heart pounding. "Are you sure?" "I'll send you the county records link." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at my desk poring over forms, legal documents, online portals I didn't fully understand. But one thing became clear. Elaine was right. My name was still listed, not just as contributor, as co-owner. I owned half that house, the one I'd been locked out of. Suddenly, the image of Whitney smirking through the window wasn't just cruel. It was illegal. The next day, I called a lawyer. Not the one who did Henry's estate, he'd retired. A new one. Younger. Sharper. Her name was Maya. She listened. Didn't rush. Didn't flinch. Then she said, "You have more rights than they'd like to believe." I nodded slowly. "I don't want to take their house," I said. "I just want them to understand that I won't be treated like an old shoe they can leave on the porch." She smiled. "I can help you do that." That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I baked another batch of gingerbread. This time it didn't crack. By the end of the week, I had a certified copy of the mortgage deed in my hand. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink precise, and dated. My name, Evelyn Rose Hawthorne, was printed beside Henry's in that unmistakable legal font, as clear and binding as the promises we once made under our breath while signing it. Below that, a clause I'd forgotten. Upon the death of either party, co-ownership remains unless formally relinquished. I never relinquished it. I just gave them the down payment and walked away. That was my mistake. I'd mistaken generosity for closure. Now it was time to correct that. I mailed the first envelope 3 days later. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a sticky note. On the paper, a scanned copy of the deed. Highlighted, circled, annotated. The note read, "You forgot to lock the door to the law. No signature, just my handwriting. Neat, elegant, measured." The second envelope I handed over in person. Whitney opened the door with a smile she hadn't earned. "Evelyn, I wasn't expecting—" "I'm not here to stay," I said. I placed the envelope in her hand. She frowned. "What is this?" "Property reminder," I said, and turned around before she could open it. I didn't need to see her face. I'd already pictured it. Mark called me an hour later. "Mom, can we talk?" I let the phone ring twice before answering. "I'm listening." "I don't understand this. Why now? Why bring up the deed?" "You locked me out of my own house," I said. "Do you understand that?" He was silent. "That wasn't intentional," he mumbled. "Mark," I said slowly, "you saw me. Through the window. You saw me knock?" Silence again. He didn't deny it. "I don't want to evict you," I said. "I just want to see if you know what fairness feels like." A day passed. Then a card appeared in my mailbox. Not from Mark. From Grace. My granddaughter. Inside it read, "I didn't lock the door. I wanted to open it, but Mommy said not to. Next year I want to spend Christmas with you. Can we make cookies again?" She drew a gingerbread house. It was lopsided, frosted, full of love. I placed it on my fridge, right beside the old magnet that said grandmothers don't retire. They reload. Whitney tried to smooth things over. She sent a message through Elaine. "Let's all talk this out. We're family." But the thing about family is sometimes it doesn't act like it. And when that happens, boundaries become the only language they listen to. So I set mine. Through Maya, I sent a letter to their attorney. Polite, firm. It outlined my partial claim to the property, suggested a shared use agreement, offered a buyout option, included a clause. If no response is made in 30 days, I retain right to seek further legal action. No threats, just facts. I'd spent 76 years being silent. Now I was just being clear. 30 days passed. No call, no knock, not even an email. And then, on the 31st day, a certified letter arrived. Thick envelope. Law office seal. Inside, a formal response drafted by their new attorney. Full of phrasing like regretful misunderstanding and mutual reconciliation preferred. But they didn't deny the deed. Didn't contest the ownership. Didn't offer to buy me out either. Instead, they asked me to sign a quitclaim deed in the interest of long-term family unity. I read it 3 times, then folded it neatly, lit a match, and watched the edges curl into ash over the kitchen sink. Elaine came by the next day. She brought muffins, lemon poppy seed. "They're scared," she said. "They should be," I replied. "You're not going to evict them, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm going to do something worse." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to stay in the story." I wrote another letter. This one wasn't legal. It was personal. A Christmas card. Red envelope. Inside, a photograph of Grace's gingerbread drawing. And a handwritten note. "This is the part where you decide what kind of ancestor you want your daughter to remember." I mailed one to Mark, one to Whitney, one to Grace addressed care of Elaine. And I waited, not for their response, but for the shift. Weeks passed. The first sign came in February. A knock at the door. I opened it to find Mark standing on my porch hat in hand eyes sunken with guilt. "Can I come in?" he asked. "You already are," I said. "Half of this is yours, remember?" He winced. We sat in the kitchen. He didn't touch the tea I poured him. "Mom," he said, "I messed up." I didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it sit. Then he said, "It wasn't just about Christmas. Whitney thinks you take up too much space." I stared at him. "Too much space. She says the way you parented me makes her feel small, like she can never live up to you. And so she decided to erase me." He looked ashamed. I let her. That was the first honest thing he'd said in years. And it was enough, not to forgive, but to begin. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived. Inside, a folded apology card from Whitney. No speech, no justification, just 2 lines. "I locked you out. I was wrong." No signature. Just the word sorry, written in her script. I folded it, pressed it flat, and slid it into my journal, right between my own words. They locked me out, but I built another door. I didn't rush to forgive her. People think forgiveness is a door you open once, but really it's a hallway. You have to walk down slowly, step by unsteady step, hoping the other person's feet are moving too. Whitney didn't knock, but she sent grace. One Saturday morning, just as frost turned the porch rails to crystal grace, stood at my door holding a plastic container. Mom made cookies, she said shyly, but I iced them. I let her in. We sat at the table, opening the lid to reveal misshapen gingerbread men. Some had one eye. One wore a frosting scarf. They look awful. She giggled. They look like love, I said. Grace told me about her art class about a boy named Lucas who pulled her braid about how she hated math but loved stories. She told me that Whitney cried after I left, that Daddy got really quiet, and that Christmas felt weird this year. I wanted to come outside and get you, she whispered, but Mommy said you needed a nap. That made me pause, because that wasn't just a lie, it was a narrative. A story meant to control perception, but Grace had seen the truth. And now she was asking gently, silently, if I'd help her rewrite it. We drew for hours. She made a new gingerbread house with little paper dolls standing outside. This time she said everyone gets to come in. I hugged her tight. Because children, if you listen carefully, always tell the truth, especially when the adults lie. The next week, Whitney sent another note. No flowers, no baked goods, just a note. If you'll have me, I'd like to bring Grace over next weekend. Maybe we can talk? I stared at it a long time. Then I wrote back, if you're coming to talk, come early. If you're coming to lie, don't come at all. She came early. Alone, wearing jeans and no makeup. We sat on the porch in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, I never thought you'd survive that night. But you did. I looked at her. Did you want me to? No, she said quickly. I just wanted you quiet. I let that hang between us. I grew up with noise, she added. Fighting. Drama. I wanted peace. You scared me. Because I was calm. Because you were calm and watching. You see everything? That makes people like me feel exposed. It was the first time she spoke like a person, not a performance. We didn't reach a resolution that day, but we reached something better. Recognition. Before she left, she placed a small wrapped package on the table. I found this in the attic, she said. Didn't know what to do with it. I opened it after she left. It was my angel. The one from the old family tree. The one I thought they'd thrown away. Her halo was chipped, but her arms were still open. And that was enough. That weekend, Grace came back with a backpack full of art supplies and a storybook she'd written on stapled pages titled The Grandma Who Wasn't Cold Anymore. The cover had a big heart and a crooked house with smoke curling from the chimney. I illustrated it myself, she beamed, placing it carefully in my lap. I flipped through page by page. The drawings were wobbly, but the message was clear. A grandmother shut out by her family, then slowly invited back in by the only one who saw her truth. I think it has a happy ending, she whispered, looking down at her shoes. So do I said. That afternoon we baked together. Real gingerbread this time. Flour on the counter, icing on her nose, crumbs on the floor. Whitney arrived later holding a Tupperware of cut veggies and visibly unsure what to do with her hands. She stood in the doorway for a while watching us. Then quietly she stepped forward and picked up a cookie cutter. Didn't say a word. Just pressed it into dough. That's the thing about repair. It rarely begins with an apology. Sometimes it starts with shared silence and a heart beating behind a clumsy cookie shape. Later that evening, after Grace had fallen asleep on the couch, Whitney and I sat across from one another again. No porch this time. No tension. Just two women sharing tea in the soft light of a kitchen too quiet for pretense. She said, Grace thinks you're magic. I smiled. She thinks you planted that card she got. I didn't. I know, she said. That's why it mattered. Then she took out her phone. I want to show you something. She pulled up a group chat. Old messages between her sister, and a few friends. It was from Christmas Eve. Messages about me. Can't believe she's showing up again. I swear she just wants to be the victim. Don't let her dominate the night. Whitney scrolled quietly, then turned the phone toward me. You should see what I saw, she said, because seeing it made me sick. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. I didn't write all of them, she added, but I laughed. I let it happen. You let them lock me out, I said softly. Yes. We sat in that ache together. Then she said I told them all I was wrong. That's a start, I said. But you're not the one who needs to believe it most. She tilted her head. Then who is you? I said. You need to believe you're more than the woman who did that. She left quietly. Grace stayed the night. We read 3 stories, made popcorn, and I tucked her in under my old quilt. Before she drifted off, she said, Grandma is forgiveness like a secret. No, sweetheart, I said. It's like a garden. Does it take a long time? Yes, I whispered, brushing her hair back. But the flowers are worth it. By spring, things had changed quietly, not dramatically. There were no grand gestures, no declarations of healing, just small invitations. An extra chair pulled out during family dinner. A phone call that didn't begin with "I need something." A genuine thank you whispered after dessert. Whitney began to show up in unexpected ways. She invited me to Grace's school art show, brought over a new box of my favorite tea without asking, and one day she handed me a notebook. I thought maybe you could write your story, she said. The real one. I opened it. The first page was blank. The second had her handwriting. Write what they should have known. Grace's teacher, Mrs. Donnelly, was the one who asked me to speak at the school. Just a 10-minute storytime session, she said. But Grace had talked about me so much that the staff thought it would be meaningful. I wasn't sure what to say, so I brought gingerbread, not cookies. The story. I stood at the front of a classroom filled with children, all cross-legged, wide-eyed, sticky-fingered from juice boxes. And I told them about a grandmother who got locked out of Christmas. I changed the names, softened the ending, told them the snow sparkled like magic dust, and that the woman found a way back in because a little girl left breadcrumbs of kindness. They listened like it was a fairy tale. But when I looked over at Grace, I knew she saw through it. She knew it was real, and she was proud. Afterwards, one of the kids asked if the grandma had forgiven them. I smiled. She forgave herself first, I said. The applause was small, but genuine. Whitney clapped. So did Mark. Grace beamed like her heart would float. And I didn't feel invisible anymore. Later that day, back at home, I looked at the gingerbread recipe. I hadn't changed it in 40 years. I thought about updating it. Less molasses, more cinnamon, something new. But I didn't. Because not everything needs to be rewritten. Some things only need to be remembered right. That evening, Whitney called me not to ask for anything, but to talk. We spoke for an hour. She told me about her parents' silence, about how she always felt like love had to be earned, how she hated how easily I gave it away. It made me jealous, she admitted. Then you turn that jealousy into power, I said. She didn't deny it. I'm trying to turn it back, she whispered. We don't heal by erasing the past. We heal by walking through it together. Even if the path is uneven and our hands shake, even if the porch light was once off, because someone somewhere left a light on inside. And eventually we remember how to come home. Spring turned into early summer, and with it came the garden. I hadn't planted in years. My knees weren't what they used to be, and the soil in my backyard was stubborn, clay-packed, and slow to warm. But Grace had asked if we could grow something together. Flowers or food. I'd asked. She'd shrugged. Something that smells nice. So we planted lavender. Rows of it. And when Grace wasn't there, I dug a little deeper. Sowing snapdragons and basil, rosemary, and foxglove, each chosen for what they meant. Lavender for peace. Snapdragons for strength. Basil for protection. Foxglove, well, foxglove was for boundaries. The soil didn't resist me this time. It opened like a breath. One Sunday morning, Mark arrived early. Alone. He carried a cardboard box filled with dusty binders and old photos. These were in the attic, he said. I figured, you might want them back. I sat on the porch and opened the box. Inside were pieces of my life I'd forgotten. Henry's old navy hat. A kindergarten drawing Mark had made of me with giant hair and 3 arms. My mother's necklace. One of Whitney's first Christmas cards to me from back when we were still pretending to like each other. At the bottom was a note. It read, I don't know if I can undo what happened, but I can carry the box. That note was more than an apology. It was a promise. I invited him to stay for tea, and he did. We didn't talk about Christmas. We talked about summer. That evening, I pulled out the notebook Whitney had given me. The one with the message, "Write what they should have known." I sat at my writing desk, lit the candle I only used for memory work, and wrote the first sentence. The door was locked, but the story was open. The second line came slower. I didn't scream. I didn't knock. I waited. And then the rest came like breath after drowning. I wrote until midnight, until the candle gave out, until the silence became soft again. The next morning, I printed what I'd written. I folded the pages, slipped them into an envelope, and left it on Grace's nightstand for when she came to stay the next weekend. No title, no explanation, just, "For Grace, from the porch." I don't know if she'll understand all of it right away, but one day when she's older, when she feels someone trying to push her out of a story she helped build, she'll know how to stand on the porch, how to wait in the cold without breaking, how to rewrite the ending without needing anyone's permission, because I taught her that, and no one can take it back. By midsummer, the garden was in full bloom. Every time the breeze passed, the scent of lavender followed it like a memory. Grace loved to press her face into the blossoms and sigh like they were pillows made of clouds. Whitney came by more often now, though never unannounced. Once she brought a pie, another time she brought silence. Both were accepted. One Saturday, as the sun hung low and golden, we had dinner outside. The three of us, Grace, Whitney, and I, sat at the picnic table Henry had built decades ago. The legs were still sturdy, even if the paint had faded. Grace insisted we light candles. She'd seen it in a movie, she said, "Makes everything feel like a fairy tale." I let her. She scattered petals on the table and said, "This is the best day." Whitney looked at me and her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. After dinner, Grace went inside to wash up. That's when Whitney reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I wasn't going to give this to you," she said, placing it in front of me. "But Grace said it belonged here." I opened it slowly. Inside was my locket, the one I'd thought was lost years ago. It held two pictures, one of Henry, one of baby Mark. "You found it?" I asked. "It was in a jewelry box I inherited from my mom. I think she took it." "I don't know why." I nodded. Sometimes hurt people pass on thievery like inheritance. But that didn't matter now, because the locket was home, and so was I. We sat there a while longer. She asked me about Henry, about the way he'd laugh when he was nervous, the way he whistled while reading, the time he stayed up all night building a dollhouse for Mark's birthday because he'd forgotten to order one. "I think Grace would have loved him," Whitney said softly. "She already does," I replied. That night, I found Grace asleep with my story pages tucked under her pillow. She'd read them, dog-eared every page, underlined a single sentence in purple crayon. The cold didn't break me. It revealed them. I kissed her forehead, whispered, "Yes, my love," and it made room for you. Sometimes the door they close behind you becomes the one you never want to walk through again, because what you build outside of it is more honest, more fragrant, more you. By August, it wasn't just the lavender that bloomed, it was me. I'd grown quietly in the cracks they left behind. I was no longer the woman who stood shivering on a porch, waiting for someone to remember her. I was someone who knew how to remember herself. Whitney and I began walking together in the mornings. Just once a week at first. She always showed up with something in her hand, banana bread, old photos, a question she wasn't sure how to ask. One morning, she brought a paper folder. Inside were typed pages titled "Estate Transfer Plan." She looked at me, her hands trembling just a little. "I want you to decide what happens next." I took the folder, opened it, and saw the impossible. My name at the top. "Co-decision maker?" "It's not a peace offering," she said. "It's a correction." I nodded slowly, because it was. That evening, I sat on my porch with Grace. She braided my hair with pink ribbons while I told her about the first garden Henry ever tried to plant. How he dug holes too shallow and how everything grew sideways. "He learned, though," I said. "How?" "He listened to the plants." Grace giggled. "Plants don't talk." "They do," I whispered. "You just have to know how to hear." The next week, I did something small but powerful. I went back to church. Not because I'd found faith again, but because I wanted to sit in a room where people remembered my name without needing me to earn it. When I walked in, old Mrs. Collins gasped. "Evelyn Hawthorne," she said. "Well, now it's Christmas in August." I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. Christmas had already happened in June, in a kitchen filled with gingerbread crumbs and forgiveness. After the service, I lit a candle, not for revenge, not even for peace, but for Henry, because without him, I wouldn't know what home could look like. That night, Whitney texted me a photo. It was Grace asleep in bed, clutching my locket in one hand and her storybook in the other. The caption read, "She wants to be just like you." I stared at the screen for a long time and whispered into the quiet, "May she be better?" I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. That soft certainty, the kind that lives in your bones when something once broken finally knits itself together. Not the same, but stronger, where it healed. September came with shorter days and longer shadows, but I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. One afternoon, I opened the cedar chest in my bedroom. It had been years. Inside were letters, dozens, some unopened, others reread until the creases were worn thin. Love notes from Henry, school drawings from Mark, a tiny pair of baby shoes I'd kept for no reason but memory. At the bottom, I found the recipe box. Not just any box. The box. The one my mother gave me. The one I'd once considered throwing away during a spring cleaning fit because Whitney called it clutter. I held it in my lap, opened the lid, and inhaled the scent of flour-dusted years. Inside I found the card. Faded, handwritten, stained with molasses. Gingerbread. The original. I copied it onto fresh paper and wrote at the bottom, "Passed down from those who remembered the cold." Then I called Grace. We baked that evening. 3 generations, one spirit. Mark came by to help decorate. He made a mess of the icing. Whitney laughed and offered to sweep. It was the kind of joy you don't post on social media because it's too sacred, too real, the kind that belongs in memory only. When the cookies cooled, I handed Grace a tin filled with the best ones. "Give these to someone who needs to feel seen," I told her. She thought for a moment, then whispered, "Ms. Boyd at school. She cries sometimes in the teacher's lounge." I nodded. Grace was already better than me. That night, Mark lingered after Whitney and Grace left. He stood by the doorway, uncertain. Then he asked, "Why didn't you press charges?" "About the house." I looked up at him. "Because you needed the reminder more than the punishment." He nodded. Then did something I hadn't seen since he was 10. He knelt beside my chair and laid his head on my knee. "I'm sorry, Mom." I placed my hand on his head. "You already said that," I said gently. "Now live like it mattered." And he has. October brought crisp air and the smell of wood smoke, and with it an idea I hadn't dared imagine in years. A real Christmas. One that wasn't wrapped in obligation or layered with resentment. One that wasn't about saving face or tiptoeing around tension. A celebration of survival, of truth, of earned peace. So I sent out invitations. Handwritten, no stamps. Each one tucked into a doorframe, a mailbox, or a school folder by Grace. They read, "You are invited to Evelyn Hawthorne's Christmas in November. Gingerbread, gratitude, and grace will be served. Come warm. Come honest." The first RSVP came from Elaine, then Mrs. Donnelly from Grace's school, then 3 of my old library co-workers I hadn't seen since Henry's memorial. Even Whitney's sister responded. But I waited for 2 names, Mark and Whitney. They didn't reply for days. Then 3 nights before the dinner, I found a box on my porch. Inside was a ceramic angel, the same one I thought I'd lost years ago. Its wings had been repaired with gold lacquer. The note attached said, "We won't miss it. Thank you for not missing us." That Friday, the house was filled, not with gifts or blinking lights, but with people who wanted to be there, who knew what it meant to be invited after the betrayal and still be welcomed with open arms. Grace wore a dress she'd sewn with Whitney red velvet, with a pocket stitched in the shape of a gingerbread man. Elaine brought cider. Mark arrived early to light candles. Even Whitney brought something, a box of memory ornaments, each labeled with a year and a lesson. She handed one to me that read, "The year I opened the door back up." Dinner was loud, messy, real, and afterward we stood in a circle around the table. I didn't ask for speeches, But Whitney spoke anyway. She said, "Some doors are hard to reopen because we nailed them shut ourselves. Thank you for undoing my damage, for showing Grace that truth isn't something to be afraid of, but something you can stand in." Then she handed me a final envelope. Inside a new deed. It named me as full co-owner of the home they lived in, not for control, but for honor and trust. The cold never came that night, only warmth. Because when people choose you after the hard part, that's love. And when you choose yourself during it, that's freedom. Christmas came early that year, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like something I needed to prepare for. It felt like something that had already arrived. I didn't rush to take down the lights. Didn't worry if the silverware matched. The real decorations were in the faces that surrounded me, in the way people lingered, not wanting to leave. The true music was Grace laughing with Elaine in the kitchen, Mark humming an old song under his breath, Whitney asking me if she could take my recipe box on loan. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the life that happens after you stop waiting for one. The day after the dinner, Grace and I sat in the living room with mugs of warm milk and the tin of leftover gingerbread. She picked one up, inspected the frosting, and said, "You know what I like best?" "What's that?" "That he's smiling. But not too much." I nodded. "He knows what happened." "Yeah," she said, "but he still likes us anyway." That night I packed away the angel. Her gold-lacquered wings caught the light one last time before I nestled her into tissue paper. Not because I was burying anything, but because now she could rest. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically stay perfect. Mark forgot to call one afternoon. Whitney got defensive during a conversation about Grace's school schedule. But now there was room for imperfection. Because love once tested and rebuilt is stronger than politeness. It doesn't need everything to be clean. It just needs everything to be real. One Sunday I visited Henry's grave. I hadn't been in over a year, not because I didn't miss him, but because I didn't want to come to him with bitterness in my mouth. I laid a sprig of lavender on the headstone and whispered. I finally opened the door. The wind moved gently through the trees, and I felt him, not in the chill, but in the warmth I'd carried home. That evening, I wrote the last sentence in my notebook. They closed the door. I turned it into a story. Now the house is full. Grace came to visit the next day. She brought 2 cookies, one for each of us. We sat in the garden, now bare for the season, and she looked up at me. "Next year," she said, "can we have Christmas on the porch?" I smiled. "We already did, sweetheart." There's a unique kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the kind that echoes, but the kind that settles like snow on every surface of your life. Evelyn Hawthorne knew that silence well. She lived with it the night she stood locked outside, hearing her family laugh through frosted windows while she waited in the cold with a plate of gingerbread in her hands. But that silence didn't win. It didn't define her. She didn't shout. She didn't rage. Instead, she reclaimed her place one step at a time, through old deeds, remembered recipes, quiet boundaries, and the simple power of not disappearing. In the days that followed, her story became a map that led her granddaughter Grace through truth, a map that reminded Whitney and Mark that damage can be undone, but only if we choose to see it. Forgiveness didn't arrive in a grand gesture. It arrived in cookies and stories and candlelit dinners without expectations. It arrived in the space where Evelyn no longer needed permission to belong. Her story is not just about one cruel Christmas night. It's about what happens after the door closes and the soul remembers it can build another one. It's about the porch light left on even when no one deserved it. And it's about love, not as a gift, but as a choice. So if you've ever been locked out of something you helped build, know this. Your story isn't over. The door may close, but your strength, your silence, your truth will always find a way in, even in the coldest season. Especially then,